Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 209, Sir Thomas Molloy, Part 1. In the Brisbane Telegraph on the 17th of February 1938, there was a small article titled Death of Rich West Australian Octogenarian. Perth, 17th of February. At the age of 86, Mr. Thomas George Anstruther Molloy, who was one of the wealthiest men in Western Australia, died yesterday in Perth. It is expected that his estate will realise more than £500,000. He has lived in this state for 75 years and on 4 occasions was Mayor of Perth. Thomas George Anstruther Molloy made a significant contribution to the cultural life of Perth. He was born in Toronto, Canada West, to John Molloy, a soldier who served with the Royal Welch Fusiliers in the Crimean War and the Indian Mutiny of 1857. His mother was Jane Curtis. In 1862, the family migrated to Western Australia, where his father served as a pensioner guard supervising convicts who'd been transported. Thomas Molloy attended Christian Brothers College in Perth and left school at the age of 13 to work at a printing office. He then worked in the cooperative movement with J.T. Riley and became manager of the City Cooperative Store. By 1870, his successes enabled him to buy the entire block between Murray and Wellington Streets for £900. On the 18th of February 1873, he married Amelia Littlejohn Molloy, no relation. They moved to South Australia, where he worked as a merchant, and then returned to Perth in 1875, where he became a successful baker, not only owning his Godric Street shop, but also 10 two-roomed cottages for his workers. He then returned to printing and worked for the Daily News from 1881, and from 1884 became the commercial manager for the West Australian. He became involved in buying and selling real estate in the central and western parts of the city, and by the 1890s, with the onset of the gold rush and the resulting flow of capital in Western Australia, this had proved profitable enough, an enterprise that he was of independent means and had become one of the largest landholders in Perth. His wife died on the 21st of April 1888, aged only 35, when their youngest surviving child was only 6. Thomas then married Mary Rennie McHale on the 23rd of January 1889, with whom he had 2 daughters. In 1884, Molloy was elected to the Perth City Council, where he represented the Central and West Wards until 1906. In December 1891, Molloy nominated for the by-election, which he won against the Mayor Edward Keane, and was duly appointed to the vacancy on the 13th of January 1892. Being Roman Catholic and not part of the landed classes which dominated the Parliament of that time, he proved to be somewhat populist in character, advocating universal suffrage and public ownership of power and utilities. He became embroiled in controversy regarding education, which split the Labor movement. This issue was a major one in the 1894 election amongst the voting public, with all 3 members losing their seats, Molloy being defeated by Randall. After this loss, Molloy unsuccessfully contested the Metropolitan Province seat in the West Australian Legislative Council in 1894. He then attempted to re-enter Parliament on a further 12 occasions under a variety of party labels or as an independent, and then as a Nationalist Party candidate from 1917 onwards. His last effort was at a by-election for the Metropolitan Province in 1932. He became a Justice of the Peace in 1895. He continued through this period as a Perth City Councillor, and he served as Mayor of Perth in 1908 and 1909, as well as 1911 to 1912. He was known as something of a radical, espousing similar causes to those he'd supported previously, with a notable achievement during his time as Mayor being the ending of the Perth Gas Company's monopoly on power and lighting in 1912. He also opposed admission charges to enter public spaces and sporting events on the Esplanade and supported the construction of free public baths. After 1912, he tried repeatedly to become mayor again with poor results, being labelled too stubborn to work with. He was also instrumental in attracting finance and commissioning some of Perth's early cultural buildings. Up until the 1890s, Perth had no theatres, and actors performed in either the Perth Town Hall or St George's Hall,
described by the West Australian in 1891 as a place where there is much that is unsuitable and the most significant proof of the old-time backwardness and poverty of Western Australia. At that time, Western Australia had a little over 53,000 people, a figure that was to double within the next 5 years. On the 20th of September 1893, Molloy purchased the Perth lot on the south side of what's known as Hay Street Mall with the assistance of Alexander Forrest, the then Mayor of Perth, and obtained a publican's licence a week later. In 1894, the Hotel Metropole was constructed on the site, and in February 1895 he announced plans for a 1,000-seat theatre to be built on land adjoining the hotel. The foundation stone was laid by Mrs. A. Forrest on the 8th of May 1895, and the Theatre Royal opened on the 19th of April 1897. While its initial success was mixed, due mainly to the changing economic and demographic characteristics of Perth, by the 1930s it had become the most popular picture theatre in Perth. It closed in 1977. By 1901, Perth had become a place of optimism and confidence fuelled by the gold rush. In 1902, after the ascension of King Edward VII to the English throne, Molloy announced plans for a new theatre at Hay and King Streets to be known as His Majesty's Theatre. It was completed at a cost of £63,000, equivalent to around $11 million today. It was designed by architect William Wolfe and built by Frederick Lieb, although Lieb had to pursue Molloy, reputed to be one of the most litigious businessmen in Perth, through the courts at exorbitant costs all the way to the High Court and the Privy Council for the final payment of £17,000, equivalent to around $3 million today. The theatre boasted the largest stage in Australia for many years, and the Heritage Council of Western Australia listed the building in 1999, describing it as having the most lavish and well-executed ornamentation of any Federation-free classical theatre building in Australia. Molloy went on to build other hotels such as the Australia Hotel in Perth, the North Beach Hotel, the Brighton Hotel in Scarborough, and the Oceanic, later known as the Mossman Park Hotel. His second wife Mary died on the 7th of February 1925, and Thomas was created a Knight of the Order of St Gregory the Great in 1931. Thomas Molloy died at the St John of God Hospital, Subiaco, on the 16th of February 1938, and after a requiem mass at St Mary's Cathedral, he was buried in the Roman Catholic section of the Karrakatta Cemetery. He was survived by one daughter from his second marriage. On the 26th of February 1938 in the Perth Guardian, Tom Molloy's will. Prolonged fight with taxation authorities ends, the clouding of the latter years. The termination of the earthly career of Thomas Molloy and the suggested confusion of two conflicting wills has provided Perth with a ton of gossip during the last few days. Well-informed opinion has assured Mrs Grundy that old Tom, who had obviously been in failing health in recent months, made a devil of a mess of his last will and testament, and there was going to be some real sensation. The disclosure that Mr Molloy had made two separate wills 2 months apart through the instrumentality of Stone, James and Company and Mr Arthur Haynes was capped by the further disclosure that Mr Oliver Strang, the well-known motorcar dealer of Victoria Park, held a codicil or agreement in his own favour of some £6,000. So far no further wills or codicils have come to light. Inquiries indicate that although Mr Molloy made two wills and added a codicil to the first without seeming remembrance of the second, the distinction between the two wills is not as great as might be supposed, the second will making a provision for the Roman Catholic Church that the first will did not make. The late Mr Molloy's ideas became very fixed in the later stages of his life, and although his declining state of health was calculated to make him miss on details, he varied little on the essential or major issues. The intrusion of Mr Arthur Haynes and Mr O. Strang into the will was not isolated. Mr Molloy saw a good deal of the St George Terrace solicitor in the latter's boyhood, and the familiarity had persisted throughout the years. Mr Strang had been on terms of close friendship with Mr Molloy for many years. To what extent these gentlemen have benefited from their personal friendship, other than the published, is not disclosed at this stage. The daughter of Mr Molloy, Mrs Barrett, and grandson, Mr Reg Cooper, solicitor, substantially benefited from the Molloy estate during the owner's lifetime, he making direct transfers to them of properties whose taxation had been an embarrassment to him, and in turn became an embarrassment to the beneficiaries. The tragedy of Mr Molloy's life was his wealth, acquired in the major degree as an estate agent in the early days when city blocks were obtainable at suburban prices. It accumulated with the growth of the city of Perth and provided him with the wherewithal for extended investments. With federation and with the expansion of graduated taxation, substantial incomes become more and more of a nightmare to the earners, until to own property in a substantial degree involved slavery to the taxation authorities. This was emphasised during the Depression, when property values and rentals everywhere slumped, without any corresponding decline in taxation, and such men as Molloy were hard put to it to earn sufficient income to pay the grasping taxation. Over the Depression period, Mr. Molloy often found that he had not sufficient liquid assets to meet the recurring charges of taxation, and there ensued a period of quarrelling between himself and authority that did much to embitter his life. The further failure of the public to realise that a man like Molloy could be rich in taxable assets and comparatively poor in liquid resources did not help the old man, who was pressed from all quarters by would-be participants in his wealth, and his further developed in him a role of aloofness. Mr. Tom Molloy latterly found a relief from medicaments in an exterior of outward hardness, that although it did nothing to promote his popularity and his pathetic seeking of public posts, he was ill-fitted in health to fill. In advancing years, Mr. Molloy became increasingly oblivious of obvious facts concerning himself. In latter years, with advancing age and repeated experiences of the futility and penalties of wealth, he shrank more into himself. But in his active days he was a good fighter, a public-spirited citizen and a generous friend to many. So all well that ends well for Tom Molloy. On the 7th of March 1938 in the Perth Daily News, Molloy will writ. Another writ was issued today in connection with the Molloy will dispute. Mr. A.G. Haynes issued a writ out of the Supreme Court against Paul Joseph Barrett, Constance Mary Barrett, Reginald Frederick Cooper and Oliver Wilfred Strang. Mr. Haynes, as sole executor of the will of Thomas George Anstruther Molloy, dated the 1st of November 1937, claims to have that will established and to have a pretended will dated July 24th, 1937, and a pretended codicil dated January 14th, 1938, and a pretended codicil dated February 2nd, 1938. Mr. F. Curran, who represents Mr. Strang, said today that at present he had no intention of issuing a writ in connection with the matter. His client is only concerned with the question of the codicil, and that could probably be settled on a decision in the case of the writs. And on the 9th of August 1938 in the Perth Western Australian, codicil case, Molloy's capacity, grandson's evidence, a story of decay. After an 11-day adjournment, Mr. Justice Dwyer resumed the hearing of the Molloy codicil case in the Supreme Court yesterday. Oliver Wilfred Strang, motor dealer at Victoria Park, is claiming that a codicil in his favour bequeathing him £6,500 as an absolute gift, provided that the testator died within 3 months of the date of the document, was made by Thomas George Anstruther Molloy on February 2nd, a fortnight before his death. Strang is asking a pronouncement for the codicil in the solemn form of the law. But there are complications. In the involved proceeding to which the judge is now giving his attention, Strang's application is vigorously opposed by Paul Joseph Barrett, retired contractor of West Leederville, Constance Mary Barrett, the testator's daughter, and Paul Barrett's daughter-in-law, who seek a pronouncement against the codicil of the 2nd of February. Their action is consolidated with a proceeding by Arthur Goodwin Haynes, solicitor of Perth, who is invoking the court for a similar pronouncement. The Barretts are executors of what they claim is the only true will of Molloy's, dated the 24th of July 1937, it having been revived by a codicil dated 14th of January 1938. Haynes is executor for what he claims is the only true will of Molloy's, dated the 1st of November 1937, by which it is maintained the earlier was revoked. The trial judge is called upon to decide whether the codicil of the 2nd of February was duly executed, whether Molloy at the time was of sound mind, memory and understanding, whether he knew and approved of the contents of the codicil, whether Strang procured execution of the codicil by undue influence, and whether the codicil was intended to operate as a testamentary instrument. Before opening his case yesterday, Mr. Haynes said that he was instructed that since the adjournment of the court last Wednesday, Strang had approached one of Mr. Haynes's witnesses with the intention of influencing his evidence and referred to a certain document which should now be produced. Justice Dwyer asked, "Why shouldn't he speak to one of your witnesses?" Mr. Haynes said he approached the man and I suggest offered him an inducement and produced a document which I want produced here. Mr. Justice Dwyer asked why. Mr. Haynes said, "I want to cross-examine Strang with regard to it." At this stage, Strang leaned forward and held a whispered conversation with Mr. Curran, who then rose and said, "It is a copy of the codicil with no signature on it, Strang tells me. Mr. Haynes said something was scratched out, I understand." Mr. Justice Dwyer said Mr. Curran made no admission, he made a denial. He said that Strang informed him that the document was only a copy, and if that is so, then it is of no importance. The first witness yesterday was Carl Drake Brockman, a solicitor of Perth. He said he'd known the late T.G.A. Molloy for many years. One day early in February, the witness saw Molloy standing in the roadway near the foot of Sherwood Court. The traffic was inconvenienced and the drivers of various vehicles seemed to be a good deal annoyed. Molloy seemed to be absolutely helpless and dazed. The witness spoke to him and he made no sign of recognition, though he made a rumbling noise in his throat. He was like a peevish child. Witness, doing his best to humour him, led him to the footpath nearby. When the witness left him, he stepped onto the gutter. The witness was one of those some years ago that had helped make Molloy Vice President of the National Party. When witness saw him on the occasion he had described, 3 or 4 days before he was taken to hospital. He wore a vacuous expression and was as helpless as a child. Molloy had been on his regular beat, and the witness had considered that someone else would have picked him up and looked after him, probably somebody whose duty it was to attend to him. Therefore the witness did not telephone to Molloy's office. Gertrude Reardon of Mount Lawley said that she'd known Molloy for 14 years and had been employed by him for several periods, the last that commenced last September. His walk last year was shuffling, but he seemed mentally normal. His speech was just a mumble and the witness had great difficulty in understanding him. On the 2nd of February, Molloy called at his office and asked the witness why she had not been to see him. He was very feeble and was a pitiful sight in every way. His health had deteriorated a good deal since last September. On the 4th of February, Molloy again visited his office. His condition seemed a little better than it had been 2 days before, but when replies were made by witness to certain questions concerning his business, he gave no indication that he understood what was said. On the 5th of February, a witness found Molloy wandering aimlessly around his office. His hands were outstretched in front of him. He seemed to be groping, and the witness doubted whether he saw her. The witness said that she knew Strang, who had visited Molloy's office on several occasions while Molloy was in hospital. About 3 days after Molloy's admission to hospital, he spoke to the witness about Molloy having mentioned leaving some money to him. Witness, after reading the codicil, which Strang claims to have signed on the 2nd of February by Molloy, said that the phraseology was not altogether similar to the phrasing used by Molloy when dictating. With reference being made to certain amounts on the 4th of February, Molloy made no inquiries as to details. This was very unlike him, as he was a very keen businessman. On the 4th of February, Molloy dictated a memorandum concerning his resignation from the Karrakatta Cemetery Board. The witness typed part of the memorandum. On the 4th of February, Molloy was in his office for an hour and a half. On the 5th of February, he was in the office for 30 to 45 minutes. He sat at his desk, he gave no instructions, and no documents were placed before him. He spoke to Jacobson, a bookmaker, concerning a bet. He asked the witness to write him out a cheque. Soon after this, the witness found him wandering aimlessly round his office. The witness was unaware that Molloy had placed great reliance on Strang. At the conclusion of Mr. Haynes's opening address, the first witness was called to the stand, Reginald Frederick Cooper, Molloy's grandson. He was a Perth solicitor and said that Molloy was 85 years of age when he died. He had been his grandfather's solicitor and business advisor, and Molloy had consulted him on all of his business affairs. In all the discussions relating to business, Strang's name was never mentioned. In October 1932, when in the eastern states, Molloy suffered a paralytic stroke. On Good Friday night in 1933, he suffered a second stroke and was speechless for some weeks. In October 1936, against medical advice, he travelled to Victoria to attend the Melbourne Cup. Last year, he went gradually downhill, and towards the middle of the year, he lost all sense of proportion and his memory began to fail. One day he said, "My brain's going." During last December, his health became so bad that he was incapable, in the witness's opinion, of appreciating what he was doing in his business transactions. Last January, witness did not discuss business affairs with him at all because he was not in a fit state. He was more or less in a trance. The witness said that on the 24th of January he visited Molloy at his home in Havelock Street, West Perth, and heard him mumble, "Must get married." He was then in bed. On the 26th of January, the witness saw him again. He was still in bed and in a dazed condition. On the 2nd of February, he called at the witness's office and talked for some time. The witness could not understand anything he said except the sentence, "They think they're shrewd." He repeated this several times. On the 4th of February, he returned to the witness's office, staring vacantly in front of him, and then went to his own office. The witness was sure that during February, Molloy was unable to appreciate the effect of his business dealings. On the 18th of February, Strang called at the witness's office and told him that he was disappointed that the old man had left nothing, as he had promised. Witness told him that he understood that in the will of which Haynes was executor, provision was made for certain free-of-interest loans to Strang. Strang said that at one time Molloy had given him a document which he had destroyed, and on February the 2nd another document. Witness said, "I'd like Mr. Haynes to see it. Will you bring it in?" Strang said, "Yes, I will." On the 21st of February, Strang again came to the witness's office, continued Cooper, and produced a promissory note, remarking, "What about putting your signature to it?" The witness declined to do so. Strang produced a further document which he said the old man had dictated. He promised to let Haynes see the document on the following morning. Molloy's address was stated on the document as 27 Havelock Street, whereas the actual address was 25 Havelock Street. Later, Strang told Witness that he could have got £50,000 from Molloy during his lifetime and that the old man had promised to go and fix things up with Haynes. He also said that if money were handed over to him, he could build a memorial to Molloy and keep his name before history. Mrs. Barrett, he said, should pay him £4 or £5 a week in view of all that he'd done for Molloy. If the witness had any proposition to submit, Strang added he could get in touch with him. Witness did not get in touch with him. The relationship of Molloy and Strang was based on two motives on Molloy's part. He desired to be driven about in a car by Strang, and he was obsessed with obtaining a knighthood. He believed that Strang might someday be able to assist him in getting a knighthood. Witness said that Molloy had a good knowledge of legal phraseology and that the phrasing of the codicil on the 2nd of February was not as would have been dictated by Molloy while in his right senses. Molloy had made a number of wills. His English was very good and he was a close-fisted man. Witness said that Strang had been a great friend of Molloy's. He would not say he was his greatest friend. Molloy was a difficult man to get on with. He and Strang seemed to fit in. Molloy had not been generous during his lifetime to people who had been of service to him. The witness was aware that Miss Falconer, an employee of Molloy's, had been left £5 a week by him. Witness could not see why Molloy should have left anything to Strang. He said that he did not know what services Strang had rendered Molloy beyond putting up with a certain amount of inconvenience on his account. Strang might have accompanied Molloy when he went to see the Prime Minister concerning a knighthood for Molloy. Molloy had been very generous to the witness, to the extent of £85,000. He'd transferred a number of his properties to Witness. The witness had been concerned about Molloy's will on account of the witness's brothers and sisters because he knew that Mrs. Barrett had been continually at Molloy concerning the provisions of his will. In mid-January, Molloy was not idiotic, but on the other hand he was unable to marshal his thoughts and was incapable of making a codicil. Towards the end of January, he attended the opening of a school. The witness did not know whether Molloy made a speech on that occasion or made a donation of £75 to the school. Son Jacobson, who said that he was an agent, told of having known Molloy for 30 years and intimately for 25 years. The witness had formerly been a bookmaker and had on many occasions received temporary loans from Molloy for the use of business, ranging from £25 to £300. Shortly before last Christmas, the witness called at Molloy's office and asked Molloy to lend him £200 to be used for a financial guarantee when witness applied, as he then intended, for a new licence as a bookmaker. Molloy, who seemed dazed, said, "I don't know you." Witness said, "You don't know me? You've known me in the past, to your sorrow on several occasions. What's wrong with you, Sir Thomas?" Molloy merely mumbled, so the witness went away. When the witness returned later in the day and broached the matter again, Molloy said he would help him. Witness called on him several times earlier this year and noticed that he seemed to be failing rapidly, physically and mentally. Towards the end of January, the witness visited him at his home and asked him how he was. His reply was a mere grunt. On the 2nd of February, saw Molloy wandering on the roadway of the Esplanade, Perth, shortly before noon. He was standing in the centre of the road with Alexander Gollan, a journalist, near the foot of Sherwood Court. The witness led Molloy away and, after leaving him sitting on the running board of a stationary car, went for one of his employees, Miss Falconer. Witness and Miss Falconer put him in a car. On 5th of February, witness saw him in his office and he was very childish and stupid. Molloy used to speak good English years ago. He quoted Shakespeare by the mile and was very conversant with the Irish poet Tom Moore. Witness denied having referred to Molloy as an old toad when returning from Molloy's funeral on the 16th of February. If such a term was used at all, it was used by a lady who had spoken of him as an old scoundrel on account of how she alleged he treated his employees. The lady said to Witness, "His grandson's just as bad, and so are you." On the 2nd of February, Molloy did not recognise either Witness or Miss Falconer. He was incapable of recognising anybody. The witness said that when returning from Molloy's funeral in Strang's car, Strang said, "Do you think he left me anything?" Witness said, "Why would he leave you anything? You're a blow-in." Cyril Byron, a qualified medical practitioner of Perth, said he'd known Molloy all of his life and had been friendly with his whole family. Molloy was a knight of the Order of St Gregory, an honour conferred upon him by the Pope, but he was anxious for the conferment of a temporal knighthood as well. Last January, Molloy failed to recognise the witness in the street. He stopped to talk to him. Witness was rather shocked by his condition. The next time the witness met him, about a week later, it was more difficult than formerly to make him recollect Witness's identity. Witness had been trying to interest him in the foundation of a medical school in this state, but could not induce him to concentrate. The witness first mentioned the medical school to Molloy early in January, remarking that £30,000 or £40,000 was required. Molloy, however, would speak of nothing but the knighthood. Witness did not believe, from what he had seen of Molloy on the 8th of January, that he would ever have been able to return to anything approaching a normal condition. And on the 29th of January 1939, in the Perth Sunday Times, famous Molloy will case. The Molloy will codicil case, which has become famous through the legal profession in the Commonwealth, will reach its final phase when the High Court of Australia hears the appeal in Melbourne of Mr Oliver W. Strang against the decision of Mr Justice Dwyer in the Supreme Court. Mr Strang's solicitors took the opportunity provided in a case like this to appeal direct to the High Court without the case going through the full court. Last month, an order was made by the High Court directing the trial of Mr Strang's appeal be heard at the sitting of the High Court in Melbourne, not before the 1st of March. And on the 21st of February 1939, in the Perth Daily News, Molloy will issues settled. There is every prospect of a settlement of all issues involved in the Molloy will tangle, it stated today. For nearly a year, the dispute has been in existence, but as a result of recent protracted negotiations, it is believed the parties are in a position to seek Supreme Court approval of terms of agreement. Should this be forthcoming, the last will be heard of one of the strangest tangles in the history of testamentary cases in this state. Inquiries today disclose that the issues involving the Strang codicil have been settled subject to the Supreme Court approval of terms. As between the contending parties concerned in the two wills, it was stated that a preliminary agreement had been signed by all those affected parties, and it would remain for the Supreme Court to indicate approval and also to secure the concurrence of infant beneficiaries who are interested in the residue. Today, it was intended that the High Court of Australia should be moved to adjourn the hearing of the Strang appeal so that the Supreme Court might be moved to endorse the settlement. The understanding was that if the State Court did not accept the terms, the Strang appeal would proceed. And on the 27th of April 1939, in the Kalgoorlie Miner, Molloy Estate will dispute ends. Negotiations had been proceeding for several months for the settlement of the involved litigation arising from the testamentary instruments of the late Mr Thomas George Anstruther Molloy, former Mayor of Perth, who died in February last year, aged 85. The negotiations had their final outcome today, with a successful petition to be made to Mr Justice Dwyer in the Supreme Court for his approval of the terms of settlement, a compromise embodied in two deeds of settlement dated the 19th and 20th of April. Numerous relatives of the late Mr Molloy and other persons and institutions interested as beneficiaries were represented before the judge by 2 King's Counsel and 11 other advocates, the largest number of barristers ever engaged in Perth in a single proceeding. Under the disposition of TGA Molloy, dated the 24th of July 1937, the testator provided certain annuities for members of his family and old retainers, and subject to these bequests, he left 15/18 of the residue to his sole surviving daughter, Mrs C. M. Barrett. The remaining 3/18 he bequeathed to the 4 children of his daughter, his granddaughters, Mrs. Betty Kelly, Mrs. Angela Membry, Mrs. Cooper and Mrs. Selma Verriard, and his grandson, Mr. John Cooper. To his grandson, Reginald F. Cooper, he had transferred during his lifetime a large interest in valuable hotel premises and other city properties. In the instrument of the 24th of July 1937, it was directed that after the death of Constance Mary Barrett, in the event of her having children, they should receive the full benefit of the 15/18ths of the residue mentioned, but that if she left no issue, 9/18ths of the 15/18ths were to go to her adopted child or children. She has at present one adopted child. As to the remaining 6/18ths of the 15/18ths, it was directed that after Mrs. Barrett's death, they be divided equally between Reginald Cooper, great-grandson, a son of Reginald Frederick Cooper, Betty Kelly, granddaughter, and Aubrey Molloy, a favourite grandnephew. The instrument of the 24th of July 1937 gave power to Mrs. C. M. Barrett to direct in her will that her husband, Major J. E. Barrett, should be entitled to the income on the 15/18ths during his lifetime, thus postponing receipt of benefits by Reginald Cooper Jr., Betty Kelly and Aubrey Molloy. By a subsequent instrument dated on the 1st of November 1937, the deceased vested in his sole executor, Arthur Goodwin Haynes, Solicitor of Perth, full power to appoint and distribute the whole of the estate in such manner as he should think proper. By a codicil dated on the 14th of January 1938, a month before his death, the testator amended two provisions in his will of July 1937, and it was claimed by the protagonists of that will revived it, notwithstanding its revocation by the instrument of the 1st of November 1937. Then, on the 2nd of February 1938, the testator made a codicil granting to Oliver Wilfred Strang, motor dealer of Victoria Park, free of interest loan for £20,000 or more, or any amount, and bequeathing him £6,500 as an absolute gift, provided that the testator died within 3 months of the date of the document. He died a fortnight later. Litigation commenced between the executors of the July 1937 will and the November 1937 will and O.W. Strang. Later, a special issue concerning the validity of the Strang codicil was tried by Justice Dwyer, who in the Supreme Court on the 14th of October gave judgment against Strang. An appeal against his judgment to the High Court of Australia was instituted by Strang, but subsequently negotiations for settlement resulted in the deeds to which Mr. Justice Dwyer today gave his approval. These documents embody not only the terms of settlement concerning Strang, who is to be paid £500 in full satisfaction of his claims on the estate, but a settlement between all parties. By the deeds agreed in the main provisions of the will on the 24th of July 1937, they are to be upheld subject to certain variations. Under the July will, the share of Thelma Verriard, Angela Membry, Betty Kelly and John Frederick Cooper in the residuary estate was to be £21,000. Under the settlement, it will be approximately £51,000, inclusive of a lump sum payment of £9,000. Further payments agreed upon are £10,000 to Constance Mary Barrett, with £3,124 immediately given, £1,100 to the Roman Catholic Church, including £100 for masses for the repose of the soul of T.G.A. Molloy and of the souls of the deceased members of his family, £1,000 to the YAL, and £200 to the Clontarf Orphanage, in addition to an annuity. The instrument of July 1937 and November 1937, together with an unimportant codicil of November 1937 and a codicil of January 1938, are deemed collectively the will of the deceased. Arthur Goodwin Haynes, Paul Joseph Barrett and Constance Mary Barrett are appointed executors and trustees. And on the 30th of April 1939 in the Perth Sunday Times, what Molloy case decision means. The dispute in the Molloy will case settled during the week, mainly between two wills of July and November 1937, respectively, the former prepared by Stone, James and Company, and the latter by Mr. A.G. Haynes. There are two branches of the deceased's family, one being his daughter, Mrs. C. M. Barrett, and her adopted child, and the other consisting of his grandchildren, being the son of Mrs. Amelia Cooper, of whom is one of Mr. R. F. Cooper, well-known Perth solicitor. Mr. Molloy had provided for Mr. R. F. Cooper during the deceased's lifetime to the extent of £100,000. In the deceased's earlier wills, he placed the Cooper branch of the family and the Barrett branch on equal footing, and under the Stone, James and Company will of July 1937, he'd given Mrs. Barrett and her family roughly 5/6 of the residue of the estate, and the Cooper family got 1/6. In Mr. Haynes's will of November 1937, Mr. Haynes was empowered to distribute the estate in such proportions between the deceased family as he thought fit and proper. As a result of the litigation and the settlement, which recently came in connection with the case, the provision of the Cooper family has been improved by an increase from 1/6 share, valued at £21,000, to a total value variously estimated between £40,000 and £50,000. In other words, the Cooper family, other than Mr. R.F. Cooper, benefit to the extent of anything between £20,000 and £30,000. And this is as a result of placing the two branches of the family on something like a more equal footing. There has been a reshuffle as far as the executors are concerned. Under the earlier will, Mr. Paul J. Barrett and Mrs. C. M. Barrett, the deceased daughter, and Mr. R.F. Cooper were joint executors and trustees. While under the November will, Mr. Haynes was sole trustee. Under the terms of settlement provided by the court, Mr. Cooper retires and the executors are Paul Barrett, Mrs. C. M. Barrett and Mr. A. G. Haynes. The largest assembly of bewigged gentlemen that have ever attended on any legal case in the history of Western Australia gathered together on Wednesday to get a few pickings. It's estimated that the total legal costs involved in the whole dispute and the finalisation of settlement will amount between £6,000 and £7,000. It is only fair to say, however, that if these forensic gentlemen had not been in a conciliatory frame of mind and done everything they could to promote a settlement of the issues involved, the litigation would probably have extended over another 2 or 3 years, and the total cost would have been at least treble. In part 2, I'll be covering Thomas Molloy's children.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.